On a foggy morning, I found myself wandering the cliffs of Glencairn Hollow, where the wind weaves through the landscape and soft heather bends toward the sea. It was here that I encountered Bran, a falcon I had named years ago. As he soared above, there was a palpable sense of loss in his flight. He had recently lost his chicks to a storm that had swept through, leaving me to reflect on my own heartaches. As I explored the area with my camera, tracking Bran's movements, I didn't expect to discover anything else. However, nestled against a broken fence, partially hidden by a gorse bush, was a tiny kitten, a mere scrap of fur shivering in the cold. She was too weak to vocalize her distress, just breathing in quick, shallow gulps. One of her paws was bent awkwardly, and I sensed in her gaze that she might believe help had come too late. To my surprise, she didn't flee as I reached for her. She accepted my touch without a struggle. I instinctively wrapped her in my scarf, moving without a clear plan. Bringing her home, I thought less about the future and more about the immediate comfort she needed. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an unfolding story. Later that day, I noticed Bran circling our cottage. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence, yet there he was, perched on the oak tree near the barn, watching with an intent gaze. When I placed the kitten by the fire, he continued to linger, staying long into the evening, as if something compelled him to remain close. In the days that followed, I experienced a blend of anxiety and hope. The little kitten, whom Aisling had named Thimble due to her small size, required my constant attention. She would only drink milk if it was warmed just right, and in her sleep, she cried out as if confronting dreams of falling. The vet indicated her leg was likely broken, but could heal on its own with care. The real challenge was keeping her still while the vibrant world outside our window buzzed with life. Every morning, Bran returned, faithfully perching on the oak like clockwork. It was curious. He showed no interest in hunting or leaving the vicinity. Instead, he seemed drawn to the warmth inside our home, watching over Thimble as she began to recover. In this strange, intertwined journey of loss and healing, it became clear that perhaps we all had something to give to one another. The heavy mist that enveloped the valley that morning painted the landscape in soft grays and delicate blues. It was one of those rare days when everything seemed to go quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. I had quietly opened the back door, just a crack, hoping for a bit of fresh air. The truth, though, was that I was inviting something more, a still connection with the outside. In the days leading up to this moment, I couldn't help but notice Bran's presence growing closer. His graceful movements shifted from distant circles high above to slow, intentional swoops near the barn, as if he were testing the waters between us. There was a part of me that looked forward to the moment I would see that flash of wings. It brought a sense of calm I hadn't expected. Meanwhile, Thimble, the little one in my care, was behaving strangely. Whenever Bran approached, she would drag herself toward the windowsill, pressing her tiny face against the glass. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, her tail twitching. No other sight would draw her attention that way, not even the dance of the flames in the fireplace. Aisling, my friend who often shared her insights, believed I was romanticizing everything. She warned me about the dangers of assuming safety where there might be none. Predators are still predators, she reminded me. But I wasn't so sure. I had seen grief influence the behavior of animals before, and I suspected there was more to Bran than mere instincts. In my heart, I felt his actions mirrored my own experience of loss. The day the heaviness in the air shifted was pivotal. I had stepped into the kitchen to warm Thimble's formula, a routine that had become almost automatic for me. When I returned, however, something was different. The cottage felt charged and alive, as if a whisper of the past had entered unnoticed. Then, my eyes landed on him. Bran was inside. He perched peacefully on the windowsill, talons gripping the wood firmly, as though he had found a place he belonged. The light from the fire glinted off his feathers, revealing layers of color that shifted from slate to charcoal, with hints of rust peeking through. Just then, I realized that Ewan, who had started visiting to help me with Thimble, had been right all along. "She's not afraid of him," he had said one afternoon. There was something special in the way Thimble connected with this creature, and perhaps in that moment, I too began to understand. In the intersecting lines of grief and companionship, nature was revealing its intricate patterns. Days went by like a vague dream, the kind that lingers yet leaves you unsure if it was comforting or ominous. During that time, I hesitated to share my experience with Aisling or Ewan. Perhaps I feared that their logical analysis would diminish the significance of what I had witnessed. But in my heart, I understood the weight of that moment. Not everything lost remains absent forever. Everything changed on that day when Bran, the Falcon, made his entrance into my life. He perched on the sill, watching me with a ponderous gaze. But what truly captivated me was the sight of Thimble, the kitten, small and fragile, with wide eyes that held an unusual depth for her age. As they shared the space, time seemed to suspend itself. The crackling fire was the only sound, and it blended with the rhythm of my own heartbeat, creating an atmosphere that felt almost ancient. Suddenly, Bran took flight. In a seamless, silent motion, he descended from his perch, landing just a few inches away from Thimble. To my surprise, she didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped closer, her little paw trailing across the rug, courageous and curious. It was as if she recognized him without hesitation, without fear. Bran then did something extraordinary. He tilted his head and produced a soft chirr, a gentle sound that filled the air with tenderness. It wasn't a call of danger or hunger, but rather a sound I had only heard falcons use when they were caring for their young. It was unexpected, a moment of pure connection, born of understanding and empathy. I remained still, afraid to break the spell of what I was observing. My legs ached, but the beauty of that encounter held me captive. Outside, the world could have been in turmoil, and I wouldn't have noticed. When Bran finally looked away and took off once again, he did so quietly, disappearing into the misty woods. Reflecting back on that encounter, I realized it was a powerful reminder that loss can evoke responses we least expect. In moments of vulnerability, connections can form in ways that words may struggle to explain. It was a glimpse into a deeper understanding, something beautiful amidst sorrow. Each morning, Bran perched nearby, ever watchful but never crossing the threshold again. From the gnarled oak or the ledge above the barn, he observed the cottage with an intensity that suggested he was guarding something important. Thimble, the little creature in Aisling's care, began responding to this presence in surprising ways. She became more alert and less reserved, her tiny body leaning toward the light whenever Bran's shadow flickered past the window. In the kitchen one day, Aisling held Thimble gently while adjusting the soft splint on her injured paw. Her tone was practical, yet I could sense the anxiety beneath her words. "He's a falcon, Callum, a predator. I know you want to see something special here, but that's not how nature works." Her statement felt firm, like a rule she believed should not be broken. Yet in my heart, I was not ready to accept that limitation. Meanwhile, Ewan found himself captivated by the unfolding bond. He filled sketchbooks with drawings of Bran hovering protectively over Thimble, his pencil capturing wide-eyed wonder with each stroke. "Maybe he thinks she's his chick," he suggested one afternoon, his youthful optimism shining through. "Or maybe she's the only one left who can listen." Hearing him speak this way made me smile inwardly, but I held back laughter. Ewan had unintentionally revealed something that many adults avoided. Sometimes the usual rules bend. Grief can distort instinct, and love, in its various forms, finds a way to emerge amid chaos. Yet under the surface, a tension persisted. Aisling urged us to set up barriers near the back door and keep the window closed when Thimble was outside her crate. "It's only a matter of time before his instincts come back into play," she cautioned. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Bran's actions felt purposeful. There was a thoughtful restraint in him that seemed intentional, almost touching. And then there was my own uncertainty. Caught in the midst of it all, I wondered if I was witnessing something extraordinary or simply deluding myself in my loneliness. The previous year had seen me lose Moira, and her absence hung heavily in the air, echoing in every shutter click and every solitary walk through the hills we once explored together. Perhaps I projected my longing onto Bran because I needed to find meaning, but the emotions felt as real as the moments around us. It was during the second week that things began to change. The quiet life I had been living with Bran and Thimble started to crack as whispers spread beyond our small world. At first, it was just a soft murmur. Tavish mentioned me to the postman, and soon enough, that news reached the woman at the bakery in Kinlochmar. They began to call me the Falcon Man. While the name wasn't meant to be unkind, it came with a sparkle of skepticism, a common reaction to anyone who dances too closely with the untamed. As more people learned the story, they began to visit. It wasn't a flood of visitors yet, but the trickle was enough to signal a shift. Hikers veered off the main path, drawn by the lure of our little sanctuary. A retired teacher from Fort William arrived with a long camera lens and questions that seemed endless. One visitor even asked if she could bless the kitten with crystals. It was a strange moment. Thimble trembling in my arms made the request less amusing and more unnerving. Eiling was not pleased. "You've got to control this," she exclaimed after another visitor knocked on the door, eager with a camera. "You're turning something fragile into a spectacle." It was hard to argue with her. I had tried to keep our story hidden, but news travels fast. The title, "Grieving Falcon Bonds with Orphaned Kitten," was simply too tempting for it to stay contained. To shield our little family, I began to pull the curtains tightly and kept the back door locked, allowing Thimble near the window only during Bran's early morning visits. Still, the visitors kept arriving, and with them, their questions. That same weekend, the weather turned harsh. Strong winds swept down from the ridge, bending trees low. I noticed that Bran had grown silent. Though he continued to come each morning and remained perched just outside, he no longer called out. It was as if something heavy burdened him, something we could not quite define. Meanwhile, I noticed Thimble sleeping curled against the wall under the window, her tiny paw still fragile, but her determination refusing to wane. Each time Bran vanished into the mist, I could hear her quiet cries of longing. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from the sanctuary. A barn owl had been found, wounded and disoriented near the hollow, likely displaced by the storm that had claimed Bran's nest. Eiling suggested I take it in temporarily, reasoning that I had the space. I found myself contemplating a difficult reality. Was I actually holding everyone hostage to my desire to heal what seemed unhealable? Bran had nowhere to go, while Thimble was motherless, and I was striving to piece together a family from fragments of sorrow. Yet, was my effort to create something whole only tearing us further apart? The quiet nights felt heavy as I wrestled with these thoughts. The flickering firelight barely illuminated a path through my confusion. Eiling had noticed the change in me, too. Instead of pushing for answers, she simply studied me, as if trying to discern the line between my existence and the newly formed trio we had become. One evening, as she packed her belongings, she gently reminded me, "You do realize you can't hold on to both of them. They don't really belong to you." Her words felt like a truth I could taste, yet accepting it was far more challenging. I couldn't ignore the bond that had formed around us. Thimble was growing stronger, her spirit increasingly vibrant, although her movements still reflected a certain vulnerability. She leaned forward whenever Bran was near, her body language speaking of an understanding that transcended words. I had never intended to intertwine my story with theirs. At first, I thought of myself merely as a distant observer, the photographer capturing the wild and beautiful moments of life. That distance was my comfort zone, a space where I could appreciate without interfering. But somehow along the way, I had crossed a boundary I didn't mean to breach, leaving me feeling unmoored. As I gazed at Thimble, moving with a delicate awkwardness, I began to see myself not just as her guardian, but also as a bridge connecting her to Bran. It was a valuable role, albeit a temporary one, and that realization unsettled me in the stillness of the night. Despite the difficult truth surfacing, my heart resisted the idea of letting go. Both Bran and Thimble had entered my life like echoes of companionship and purpose, rekindling a sense of hope I thought I had lost. But as I sat in the darkness, longing for a resolution, I had to confront an unsettling question. What did it mean to care for those I might eventually need to set free? It was early morning when I felt that familiar pressure in the air, a kind of unease that often accompanies change. This particular day, however, was marked by an unsettling silence that quickly grew heavier, like a thick curtain drawn across the day. Bran had vanished. There were no wings flapping above the oak, no watchful eyes on the barn roof. just an empty sky that mirrored the absence I felt inside. At first, I tried to brush it off. Perhaps the weather had driven him inland, or the winds had shifted his hunting ground. But when the second day passed without a sign of him, my worry deepened. Thimble, usually spirited, refused to eat or move from her spot by the back window. In that moment, I was reminded of a different kind of absence, one that still lingered from my past, filled with cold hospital corridors and silent farewells. This fear wasn't something you could reason away. It thrived in the emptiness. By the third morning, Ewan arrived, his face bright from the chill, dew glistening in his hair. He mentioned seeing someone along the lower trail, a man setting traps that seemed out of the ordinary. Curiosity sparked in me, but his tone held weight. I grabbed my coat and left the kettle boiling, the warmth of home suddenly feeling very far away. When we reached the lower trail, we spotted the man, a familiar figure from nearby, a sheep farmer notorious for his mistrust of predators. He was setting snares near the rocks where Bran once nested. "There's been killings," he told me, his tone matter of fact. I attempted to reason with him, explaining that Bran posed no threat to his sheep, that falcons don't prey on lambs, but he glanced at me with a mix of disbelief and disdain. "You think he understands that?" he replied, gesturing skyward. "A bird's a bird." That night was restless. I found myself on the kitchen floor next to Thimble's crate, my hand gently resting on her side. She had grown quieter since Bran's disappearance, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that promised healing. It felt different, almost as if she was holding back, waiting for someone who might not return. I wanted to believe Bran would be back, but a quiet part of me had begun to grieve. Then came the shock. The following morning, when I looked for Thimble, she too was gone. The weight of uncertainty hung heavily, amplifying the absence that now enveloped my home. The mornings after Thimble went missing were heavy with a silence that seemed to settle over the valley like ash. The mist, once a comforting presence, hung in the trees, dense and unyielding. Even the birds, which usually filled the air with their cheerful songs, had disappeared, leaving an accusing void in their wake. The day she vanished, I found myself racing through the fields without a plan. My boots squelched in the damp earth as I shouted her name, but the wind stole my voice. I climbed the ridge where Bran used to rest, my eyes darting over the treetops and the distant cliffs. Yet all I found was that maddening silence, deafening and unkind. In the cottage, things felt disturbingly different. The warmth of daily life had faded into a sterile emptiness. I had left the window cracked just an inch, hoping that perhaps Thimble would find her way back. I placed small bowls of food both inside and by the oak outside, trying to guide her home if she were still nearby. Every shadow and sound brought forth a sense of anticipation, yet no sign appeared. No paw prints, no tuft of fur. Ewan joined me in my search, his determination unwavering until his legs faltered. Aisling, too, had cut her practice short, her usual calm washed away by an anxious quiet. The reality of our situation began to set in. I remembered how Ewan had knelt on the porch, a mug of untouched tea in his hands, and asked the question that hung heavy between us. What if they went to find each other? I wanted to dismiss it as fanciful thinking, but deep down, something inside me trembled at the thought. Was it possible that the bond Thimble and Bran shared had grown stronger than the one we had with them? As the days turned into an indistinct blur, my camera sat untouched. It felt too cold in my hands, too distant from the warmth of my memories. The fear of what I might capture kept me from reaching for it. I could feel everything unravel, and worse yet, I didn't know if I had lost one of them, or both. Each moment felt littered with the weight of absence, as if something crucial had snapped, leaving our constellation of life hanging precariously in the dark. It was early morning, just before dawn, when I decided to climb the ridge alone. The sky was beginning to light up with a soft golden hue, and the wind tugged at my coat as if urging me onward. As I made my way up, each step felt heavy, weighted not just by the mud and heather, but also by the anticipation of what I might find. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Out of the corner of my vision, I spotted a shape down below, a figure that was too deliberate to be just a gust of wind. Then I heard something faint, almost lost in the breeze, a soft chirr. My heart raced, urging me to run. After a few more painstaking steps, I found them nestled in a hollow beneath the western ridge, where the cliffs wrapped around like protective hands. At first I thought it was just Bran, his sharp outline against the pale stone, wings tucked and head bowed. But as I got closer, I realized that the flicker of gray at his talons was not prey or remains. It was Thimble, thin, dirty, and limping, but alive. In that moment, I understood the significance of what I was witnessing. Bran, typically fierce and wild, stood as a guardian, watching over Thimble with a presence that was both tender and fierce. He seemed to be not just a protector, but also a father, steadfast in his role. A wave of realization washed over me. I was intruding on a bond that felt deeply profound, one I wasn't sure I had the right to disrupt. Earlier, Aisling had visited under the pretense of checking on me. Our conversations had shifted from what had happened to lighter topics like the weather and the wildlife, fox prints by the sheep pens, or the owl that had finally stabilized at the sanctuary. Yet despite our attempts at normalcy, silence often crept back in, as if our words hesitated to touch the painful memories we shared. Then, Tavish had shown up one evening, his rain-drenched cap framing a serious expression. He rarely left his croft unless something important was at stake. "Saw something," he had said, nodding towards the cliffs. His words ignited a flicker of hope in me, but it was mixed with something more uncertain, the weight of belief without evidence. Now, standing in the hollow, I took a careful step forward, my voice barely a whisper as I called Thimble's name. At first, she didn't respond, but as I spoke louder, she raised her head slowly. I saw her blink at me, confusion in her eyes, then heard the trembling mule that erupted from her. She tried to rise, but her paw dragged uselessly behind her, while Bran remained unwavering, his focus solely on her. And in that moment, I was drawn into a connection that felt both delicate and profound, a bond between them that resonated in a way I could barely grasp. The days that followed felt fragile, a quiet tension hanging in the air, almost like the still moment before a branch gives way underfoot. We moved through our routines, feeding Thimble, tending to her wounds, and replacing the soft padding in her crate with fresh wool and fleece. Yet each small act felt heavy, as if we were preparing her for something we hadn't fully acknowledged, something none of us wanted to voice aloud. When I finally carried Thimble back down the hill, the silence between us was thick with unspoken thoughts. Aisling awaited us at the cottage, her expression not one of relief, but rather conflicted. I recounted what I had witnessed, sharing my interpretation of the events, but Aisling didn't offer the reassurance I hoped for. Instead, her gaze was fixed on Thimble, now curled in a blanket. "You know she's going to need more than this," she said. "She's imprinted now, on him, on you. We have to decide what that means." Her words hung in the air, prompting me to consider our next steps. Ewan, however, seemed energized by the whole situation. He practically lit up like a storm lantern, eager to return to Bran, to study him more closely and to document everything. "It's more than instinct," he insisted, his excitement palpable. "It's a story that no one will believe unless we can show them." But I found myself questioning the importance of proving anything. What truly mattered now was our next move. As I glanced down at Thimble, I realized that we were past the point of merely saving her. It was about making a choice regarding the kind of life we were willing to create for her. Would we welcome her fully into our human world, or would we allow her to remain in that strange, beautiful in-between space where trust and wildness intertwined in a way that felt entirely unique? And could I bear the weight of having to let her go again, if that was necessary? Earlier that day, while Thimble approached with uncertainty, I had knelt down with open arms, my voice trembling as I called her name. She had limped toward me, hesitating for just a heartbeat before deciding to close the distance. With her feeble stumble, she collapsed into my embrace, surrendering to a moment of peace. Her heartbeat thudded against mine, fast, uneven, yet undeniably alive. I turned to Bran, wanting to express my gratitude, but he was already soaring into the expanse of the morning sky, his wings cutting through the light as he left behind something he had finally chosen to release. In that instant, I understood all too well that there would be no simple answers. What lay ahead was filled with uncertainty, and it was up to us to navigate that path together. It was a quiet evening when Tavish surprised me with a bag of dried peat for the fire. He placed it down and, almost to himself, said, "Some animals, they don't stay tamed, doesn't mean they don't come back." Without further explanation, he left. His words lingered like smoke in the air, leaving me to ponder their meaning. Every day, Aisling came by, always maintaining her calm professionalism. Yet there was an underlying tension in her posture, as if she had set boundaries and was gauging whether I would respect them. As she gently checked Thimble's paw, she stated, "She's healing, but she's not the same. I don't think she ever will be." Her tone held no judgment, only a straightforward truth. "You saw it too, didn't you? Out there, between her and him. That connection is unique and can't be replicated." I understood what she was implying. We were all confronted with a significant decision. Should we fully welcome Thimble into our human lives, adopting her and keeping her, or should we accept that perhaps she belonged to a world beyond us? Maybe a part of her still longed for the freedom of wings in the sky. Ewan, however, felt differently. Pacing on the porch, he was full of certainty. Why wouldn't we keep her? He questioned, his brow furrowed. "She's safe here, you love her, and she chose you. Why is this even a debate?" His confidence shone bright, but it seemed to come from someone who hadn't yet faced the idea of letting go. I envied that clear-cut perspective, but worried about the heartache he might encounter when the time came. That night, as Thimble lay curled in my lap, I watched the flames of the hearth flicker and sway, their movements echoing the calmness of her breath. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, creating a soothing symphony of sighs. I found myself contemplating the presence of Bran, somewhere in the dark, his sharp eyes scanning the night. In a whisper, I posed a question to the sleeping kitten. "What would you want?" I didn't expect an answer, yet I felt compelled to ask. "Would you prefer to stay here, where it's safe, or return to something that no one else understands?" No response came, but the weight of my question settled heavily upon me. I realized that every choice I made would come with a sense of loss. The most daunting part wasn't just letting go, it was the fear of having her decide for me. The silence in the cottage hung heavy that afternoon, a stillness that hadn't been felt for some time. Ewan was late, and Aisling hadn't arrived yet. Even the wind seemed to have quieted, almost as if the entire valley was preparing for an important conversation. Earlier, I had spent the morning with Thimble resting across my forearm, her body surprisingly light. As I watched her eyes follow the playful beams of sunlight dancing across the floor, I noticed something unsettling in her gaze. While her paw was slowly healing, she could place a little weight on it now. Her spirit seemed to wander. It was as if she was already gazing into a realm outside the walls of our home. And I found myself questioning if this distance signaled the beginning of her emotional departure. Would she be drifting away from me in a way I couldn't reach? When Aisling finally entered, she paused at the threshold as if gathering her thoughts. "I got a call," she said softly. "The rescue center in Glenfinnan has space for her. They specialize in cases like Thimble's, those that involve mixed imprinting and complex histories. They can help assess her situation and determine if she's suited for a domestic life or if she's meant for the wild." Her words landed heavily, not out of cruelty, but for their finality. The calm and measured tone she used indicated that there was no more time to wait or pretend that we were taking things day by day. A decision lay before us. Either welcome Thimble fully into our lives, or release her back to a world that may not embrace her, yet might always belong to her. I found myself staring at the fire, the soft crackle of the burning pine filling the space between us. My mouth felt parched, and my hands seemed alien to me. If I give her to them, I started to say, but I couldn't voice the rest of the thought. What if she feels abandoned? Aisling seemed to understand my unspoken fear. "She won't," she reassured me gently. "Animals remember differently than we do. They don't process time or language, but they remember through feelings." Yet those words offered little comfort. Later, Ewan burst through the door, excitement etched in his wide eyes. "I saw him," he exclaimed, breathless. "Bran, he was back near the ridge, just watching, waiting." In that moment of revelation, we stood together in the quiet that followed. The energy in the room shifted, not heavier or colder, but charged with an unspoken understanding. It felt like something significant had arrived alongside us, not as a visitor, but as a reckoning. The morning air carried a thick, quiet calm just before dawn. I sat by the window, feeling the stillness settle around me. Next to me, Thimble lay curled up on the blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. In that moment, I became aware of a decision lingering in the room, as if it were a subtle presence. It didn't need to announce itself. It simply waited, quietly urging me to acknowledge it. Wrapped around her was the scarf I had found her in long ago, its frayed threads a reminder of those uncertain nights when I wondered if she would pull through. Gently, I lifted her, and Thimble didn't protest. She looked up at me with calm eyes and nestled her head against my chest. Recollecting my steps, I made my way toward the ridge. The path felt longer than I remembered, though my boots knew it well. The damp grass brushed against my legs, a gentle reminder that I was not alone on this journey. As I reached the final rise, I saw him, Bran, standing tall and composed on the stone ledge that had once been his nest. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment we both paused, caught in the moment. The wind stirred, lifting my scarf and playfully tugging at Thimble's fur, as if coaxing her forward. I knelt and carefully unwrapped her. She didn't rush. Instead, she took a moment to sniff the air before turning to me, her expression hard to read. Then, with a newfound confidence, she walked, not unsteadily as I had feared, but with purpose, straight toward Bran. He lowered his head slightly, and that familiar soft sound, chirr, echoed through the rocks, delicate and inviting. Thimble leaned against his leg and sat down beside him, as if she had always belonged there. No dramatic farewells were needed, just a return to something that felt innately right. I knelt there for what seemed like ages, my hands resting uselessly at my sides, grounding me to the earth. Eventually, Bran took to the air, not out of fear but in a graceful arc, circling above me before disappearing behind the distant cliffs. Beneath where he had perched, Thimble remained watching still and serene. The valley has transformed, blooming once more. As spring shifts the air from damp chill to a gentle warmth, I found a new rhythm in this change. It's different from what I experienced before Thimble and Bran came into my life. This new tempo is simpler, less demanding, offering a sense of peace without the need for closure. I left the scarf on the stone, a small, hopeful gesture. Turning away, I began my walk home, a heaviness in my heart. It wasn't until I reached the edge of the pasture that the weight of the moment struck me. Her paw prints were still visible in the dirt outside the cottage door, a reminder of what was and what could have been. Tears came then, unexpected but not unwelcome. Weeks have slipped by since that day. Thimble hasn't returned, but I've noticed little signs that remind me she's still out there. A slight depression in the grass, the remnants of a vole at the barn's entrance, or a feather caught in the window frame, not from any familiar bird. These small traces have deepened my understanding that some connections transcend visibility. They teach us that love, in its purest form, may not always come back, but instead leaves us richer than it found us. No one has seen Bran either. The locals still whisper, some say he wandered off, while others claim to have caught glimpses of him hunting by the western ridges. I let them talk. I nod and smile when appropriate, silently holding on to our story. Some tales are meant to remain untold, too sacred for retelling through another's voice. Aisling still reaches out, though less frequently now. Her messages carry a softness that warms my heart. Ewan has expressed interest in writing a paper about our experiences. I hope he refrains. This journey was never about proving anything. It's about understanding the beautiful, messy interplay between grief and instinct, where wildness meets tenderness, allowing something extraordinary to emerge. Lately, I find myself thinking of Moira not with sadness, but with warmth. Watching Thimble and Bran find one another has helped me shift my perspective. Instead of trying to mend the past, I'm learning to carry it with me, to honor its presence in my life. Though I haven't taken a photograph in a long time, I've returned to sketching. I capture simple scenes, a flicker of wings, a kitten in repose, the cliffs at dawn. I can't say if I'll see those moments again, or if I even should. Each morning, however, I leave my window open, just in case. Have you ever experienced a deep connection with something wild, or faced the challenge of saying goodbye to something precious? If you have, you're not alone. Many of us find ourselves in situations where the bonds we create are not destined to last, yet they are still significant and meaningful. If you're interested in exploring more stories that highlight resilience and the unexpected ties that shape our lives, consider subscribing to our channel. Engaging with our community by hitting the notification bell and sharing your thoughts in the comments can be rewarding. We're eager to hear your stories, perhaps a tale of how you rescued someone or something, or even a moment when you felt rescued yourself. Each experience adds a layer of understanding to our shared journey. As we wrap up, remember to leave your window open, just in case life brings another surprise your way.